thinking better and thinking together about life's most important issues. A place to finally meet in the middle, to think freely and reasonably about the big questions of life. This is Thinker Sensitive. Welcome to Thinker Sensitive. My name is Ryan Ragazine, your host. We were off last week, and so hope you enjoyed your Independence Day and your 4th of July weekend. Today we're going to be continuing my interview with Randy Hardman. So let's jump right back into where we left off. This is a good lead-in to a question that I wanted to ask you about, because I know you went through something profoundly painful and extremely difficult during your time at ATS. Are you willing to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't talk a whole lot about this, but during you mentioned the sociality part of seminary and you missing out on that, and I missed out on some of that too, and that was because I had met somebody during seminary, and we had later gotten married about a year later while I was still midway through my program.
Yeah,
and she was midway through hers, but a year before I finished seminary, just shy of 2 years of marriage, my wife passed away in a car accident, and we had 2 kids together, and it was just me and my 2 kids.
Yeah.
I woke up and it was 4 of us, and then I went to bed and it was 3 of us, and I think for me, that is the hardest thing I've ever walked through in my life, will forever be the hardest thing I've ever walked through in my life. Never really coming out the other side of that. You just don't. But it was singularly, I mean, we've talked about ideas and worldview and apologetics and things like that. I remember feeling like C.S. Lewis felt in terms of, if you've ever read his Problem of Pain and you've read his Grief Observed,
mm-hmm.
and you realize they're talking about the same thing, pain and suffering, but the books don't reference each other. A Grief Observed came later, and he doesn't talk about the problem of pain. It's of no help to him at all.
Yeah.
And I realized at that point, and it was interesting because I was actually in the middle of, actually my last class through seminary had to be a class on evil and suffering.
Oh, wow.
And I had to write a paper on why God allows bad things to happen, or how that coheres with Christianity.
Yeah.
And I wrote this paper and got an A. And at the same time, I remember sitting on the ground with my daughter one of these nights. And, at this point I was working full time and going to school like 3/4 time,
mm-hmm.
and a parent of 2 young children, one of which was, 6 months old at the time of the incident. And I remember 3 nights in a row, she hadn't slept. She, woke up for the day. I took them to childcare. I worked, came back, got them, spent time with them, put them down for bed, worked on my schoolwork, and then she would wake up. It was like a power nap. Enough to get a baby through, the period of, just, she was good. She had energy, and she'd stay up until, 4 a.m., 5 a.m., something like that. Too late. Maybe I would doze in and out a little bit, but basically 72 hours I had spent without any sleep, and I was seeing hallucinations and stuff like that. And I remember, at one point looking at my daughter, who couldn't talk and couldn't understand anything, and looking at her and saying, I said her name, and I said, I don't think God exists.
Yeah.
And this was in my last semester of seminary. And I stuck my 2 middle fingers up at God. Of course, my daughter's giggling, at the time. And then I looked up at him and I said, but if you do, you need to come find me.
Yeah.
And I said, God, you made me in such a way. This is all the nonconformist stuff, all for
Sure.
me, just always wrestling with, the ideas and what I knew. And I just said, God, you made me a skeptic. You made me a nonconformist. You made my brain operate the way that it did, assuming you
Yep.
exist. I said, you need to do something that I can't chalk up to good people being good people, because, somebody can drop off a casserole and you can say thanks to God, but at the end of the day, I'm saying that's good people,
Right.
or coincidence, and, um, you know, what is it? Aristotle said something like, luck is when the person next to you gets shot with an arrow, and it's like, for me, it's like, that's just coincidence. You can explain that away, but for him it was fortunate, so for me,
Yeah.
I can have things can happen and I can explain them away. It doesn't bring me any closer to you. And
Yeah.
I'll kind of be brief here, but the long story short is, basically I had said I'm done with God. I finished up seminary, and my whole worldview. It wasn't that I entirely disbelieved that God existed, but it was, again, like C.S. Lewis said, like it's that I am convinced. I'm becoming convinced that you're a certain kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that you don't care. That you don't love. That you weren't there. And to this day, I'll still say I have no idea why. I don't even think that there is a why. What happened in our life, much less I also don't think that there's a why certain evils happen in our world and certain sufferings happen. I think that that's actually
Sure.
the most Christian answer to say is there is no answer for things that happen. But when I asked God to be present in my life, 6 months after I had stuck my middle fingers up at him and said, no coincidence, no good people, you do something that I can't explain.
Yeah.
We were needing to move into a house because where we were staying on campus, our term was running out, and I had said, I don't know where to go. I mean, I'm a single dad of 2 kids. I got a job which requires an office and supplies and computers and all that kind of stuff. I had books from seminary and my undergraduate. I just needed a room to myself, a room for this stuff. And then I had 2 kids of 2 different genders. And so we needed a place that was big enough for us, but was also within our budget. And we scoured every house in Wilmore, this little town, and they were either out of our budget or they were too small, every single house.
Yeah.
And we actually found one house that we went under contract with, but they didn't come down on the rent or the purchase price at all over a roofing issue. And so we backed out of the contract. And the day that we backed out of the contract, our realtor said, I don't have a place for you. You've looked at every place. They're washed up, you might need to look someplace else. So I can't really look someplace else. I don't know what we're going to do. But she called me later on that night and she said, well, there's one house that's going on the market tomorrow. If you would like to see it, I can get you in for an early showing. I think it might work for you guys. And I did. And I came in and I checked it out, and it was the exact size that we needed, and it was within our budget. And I was just like, well, this is it. So we put in a bid before it listed. They accepted the bid, and we started the process of moving in. And then somebody came to me and they said, oh man, you've been in that house before. And I said, no, I've not. And they said, yeah, because that's where you and I met. And I said, you and I met at this party, on my second day in Wilmore.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, that was the house that I was living at. So my memory goes back to the second day that I moved to Wilmore. And that's where I had met my kid's mom at this back to school party that was at the house that I had just gone under contract with to buy.
Oh, wow.
And so God put me in the house that I had met my wife in and my kids' mothers in. And that for me was like, This house could have gone on the market 2 weeks later, 2 weeks earlier, 2 years later, 5 years. It came on the market the day that we
Right.
needed it to, after we had scoured everything else. There were no people involved
Yeah.
outside of the realtors. And that coincidence level would have to be extremely high. So for me, that was a clear sign of God saying, I'm still pursuing you. I still want you.
Yeah.
You put a condition on me that said, and it was an honest condition. I wasn't playing games. So this was my heart cry that said, you need to come find me. And it didn't happen the next day, or 2 weeks. It happened 6 to 7 months after that. But one of the things that has done for me, number one, is restore my faith in God. Number two, it's convinced me that, he's there even amidst the silence that we have.
Yeah.
And, it's also, it's just convinced me too that if we are authentic and we're true and we're really asking out of our hearts, right? Not what we, and you got to strip all the ego away. You got to be real. You got to be 100% you. God will find you somehow. So don't ever be afraid of wrestling with God, So for me, Israel means the one who wrestles with God. The church we speak of as a new Israel. And for us, being part of the church, I think the church is best when it says there is wrestling to be had, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it authentically. I think one of the problems of things like apologetics and the evangelical church is that we see wrestling as dangerous, asking
Sure.
big questions as dangerous. And the reality is we should be pushing people to ask big questions, to ask questions about their experience and how that fits in with God, because God can handle it. If we really believe who he is, who we say that he is, then he can handle our wrestling, and we may walk with a limp forever, but he says he'll, as long as we say, do not let me go until you bless me, then he will do that.
Yeah. Randy, that's a powerful story. I think it will be extremely helpful to a lot of people who are listening. I know that I've had similar experiences in my life that have been super powerful that I will take with me to my grave. And those experiences they mean everything to us. And you kind of talked about, there's intellectual reasons why a person may believe, but then there's the experiential and the existential and those powerful experiences that we've had in our lives. And sometimes, or many times, the experience outweighs the intellectual dimension because it's something that it hits our humanity. Not to say that our rationality or our minds aren't part of our humanity, it is. But there's something about experience that hits our humanity, the subjective existential nature of who we are in such a profound way and a powerful way. And, I've had experiences where I've told other people about my experiences. And at the end of the day, I'm the only person who really understands how potent or how profound that experience is, because the other person would have to walk in my shoes to experience
Yes.
that. And I think it's the same with your experience as well. I hear it and it's powerful to me. It impacts me and my faith and my emotions, but how much more powerful it is for you because you actually walked through that and experienced it firsthand.
Sure. I've told that story to people, and sometimes it has been a encouraging thing for their faith. And I've told that story to people that, at the end of the day, they choose to say, well, it's just coincidence. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't need my story to convince anybody else, or to be meaningful to anybody else. It was meaningful to me, and that was, I think Aslan says it somewhere in Narnia. It's like, your story is your own story. It's not anybody else's story. So stop trying to read everybody else's mail. Stop trying to make your story their story. Like, let your story be your story and worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. You spoke about this a little bit already. How has that experience that you went through, how has it shaped you? How has it impacted your faith? If you haven't touched on this already, could you kind of speak maybe a little bit more explicitly about that?
Yeah, I think a couple ways. Number one, I think it made my world a lot smaller. We went to a school that said something like impacts the world, and
Sure.
I think for me, and especially for people involved in philosophy and apologetics and ministry and stuff like that, the world could be really big, right? And so we're like looking to do big things and impact the world out here, out there, everywhere. And I think, we really should be starting with impacting your world,
Yeah.
and your world, first of all, is your wife and your kids, and gosh, man, I see it all the time where people go through seminary, they get a PhD, whatever, and they lose their family in the midst of all of that because they've been so focused on impacting somebody, all the way around the world with the
Yeah.
truth that they've forgotten about the immediate needs of their family. So, I've been trying to write a book for 10 years. But my kids continually distract me from that.
Sure.
And that's something I have to continually remind myself that's okay. If I don't get this book out until I'm 50, but I've been present for my kids every day, then I've impacted my world appropriately. And maybe God will allow me to impact outside of that. Maybe he won't. But I think that's number one, is like, it's going to ask you questions about, what does mission look like in your own life? I think from, again, just like more of a theological level, it has also made God more intimate, less abstract, less of an idea. And so for me, I become less concerned with theoretical theology, and more concerned with
Hmm.
applied theology. Where does it
Yeah.
meet? Where does what you say about God meet the ground? And we desperately need more of that. In fact, I will say, I forget who it was, but said something about, if you can't take your theology to the gates of Auschwitz and preach it there, then your theology needs rethinking.
Yeah.
And honestly, the only theology that you can take to the gates of Auschwitz is silence. So it's
Sure.
not God did this, or God is sorry. Don't worry about the pain and suffering, because there's going to be some glory afterwards, or find some kind of celebration in this. Like, in fact, the only people that can actually speak any of that kind of stuff, any questions of meaning, are the people inside of that. Inside the gates of
Yeah.
Auschwitz are the only people. Viktor Frankl can be the only one to say to his fellow Jews, find meaning in this, not somebody from the outside. So I think it has rehomed for me the importance of theology, that it needs to be within its appropriate bounds, within its particular home, and that will continue to be your world. But of course, it's continued to make me ask other questions, like, what about providence? What about, why is God not here in this moment? Why don't we see him directly involved in these moments? And I think for me, it's just allowed me to say more of, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not even sure that there is an answer to that. And I don't need to spend my time trying to find an answer to that, because number one, that's going to be distracting from my home, from my mission field. But number two, I'm not convinced that there's answers to this at the end of the day, so it's going to be superfluous. Jesus died on the cross saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus himself died without an answer. He died without an answer. So there will be questions that we'll ask throughout our lives, that we just won't receive answers for. And if God is in that position, then we will be too. And We need, our faith can't be shaped around answers.
Yeah, that's powerful. Those are powerful words. Randy, I have never experienced what you experienced. And it's really important to understand that not all pain is the same, not all suffering is the same. And I can't say that I've ever experienced the death of a loved one, particularly someone who passed away well before their time. I've never experienced that in my life. I know that there are people listening to this podcast, though, who probably have or who are going through something similar. And so I wanted to ask you, what advice or what counsel could you share with some of our listeners who may be struggling with a similar event in their own lives?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
Um, that's a hard question because I think, when you're in that position, you are looking for advice, you're looking for help, but in general, everywhere you turn, you're not going to find the advice that you're looking for. You're not going to find the help or the answers that you're looking for.
Yeah.
I remember feeling very alone in what happened, alone by my friends, alone with God, very isolated. And I think the people that go through a kind of pinnacle of suffering in their lives, and I think everybody will at some point. And it may be that you're 70 years old and, your spouse of 50 years passes away and all of a sudden you wake up and you realize that everything has changed,
Yeah.
or it may be a miscarriage or, it may be even just the inability to get pregnant, or it may be the loss of a dear friend. As we're getting older, we're going to see more and more and more of that kind of stuff.
Right.
For me, it was unique because I was young. But I've seen this kind of thing happen more to others that are older, just in the past few years. And I think the reality is, you know, you have to be okay with the wrestling. And not okay in the sense like you like the wrestling, but you have to you have to recognize that wrestling through all the questions that you have is part of what you have to go through. And do it, be genuine, be authentic, scream at the sky, cuss. I don't care, I have a hole in my wall, from one day where I hit the wall one day just
Yeah.
from, I bought a punching bag later, because of it. But it was like, I needed to be me in that moment. And I think that's a hard thing in silo circles and echo
Mhm.
chambers, churches, for example. Like if you go to a church and, you're told, have faith in God, you're suffering, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I've sat in church 1,000 times since then and thought, how do I sing "You Are Good, God"? I can't sing that.
Yeah.
Um, I know that that's true, but I can't sing that now, And I think that's just an important thing is like the suffering needs to be real. God wants you real. He doesn't want your ideas. He doesn't want your mock theology. He doesn't even want um, your sublimations of comfort, as good as that can be sometimes,
Yeah.
or your projections or your excuses or anything like that. He wants you. And if you are going to wrestle with him genuinely, then do so. He'll find you
Yeah. Amen.
and he'll wound you and be okay with that,
Right. It's very true. Fill us in on what you did post seminary. We know we're familiar now with your seminary experience, but what did you do after graduating?
Yeah, I mean, for a couple years, 3 or 4 years, my focus was making sure that I was solely taking care of my little world, and that meant me and my kids. It didn't mean that I didn't write or that I didn't read books or still stay up sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning having, good long conversations with folks. But one of the important things that I did do during that period later, about 2 or 3 years after 2 years after we had bought the house, was finding a group of men that we decided to soul share with, and that's probably been my biggest saving grace through that. We're
Yeah.
about 5 years strong, maybe 6 years strong. We've had members in and out. We've also have people that have been part of the group since nigh onto the beginning. I think I'm the longest one there, but we get together around fire every week and sometimes drink beer or coffee or whatever, and ask ourselves the questions. How are you doing? What good have you done this week? What are your sins this week, and how can we pray for you?
Yeah.
And that sounds very programmatic, but after a while, that just becomes very organic and very authentic, and you start to realize that fellowship means that you share it all. You confess, that you praying together means imploring God together, means grieving together. It means being angry together. And I will say that, in that period of time, I've seen everybody in this group of men hit rock bottom. And I've seen it for all of those times, us being able to pull each other out, or at least sit with each other in that,
Yeah.
in that rock bottom. So for me, that's probably actually like, I don't want to end this with like, oh, I just went and did this on my own. I'm still not even sure that even with the house, God being involved in that, if it wasn't for a group of men that have prayed for me, that have continued to pursue me as an individual, that I would be a Christian. I might have found some way,
Yeah.
because again, ideas and even experiences can be run away from.
Sure.
What you need is commitment. That's there too. So that's one of the things that we try and do now through the business that I run now, is really stress the importance of fellowship. But on a practical vocational side, I spent a couple years working for some publishing houses, and then in 2016 started a little side hustle called Drinklings Mugs, which later became Drinklings Coffee and Mugs. And I was also pursuing my MSW, and in 2018 took a pastorship job and preached for about a year.
Yeah.
But in 2019 we went full time with Drinklings Coffee and Mugs, started a little cafe, increased our wholesale operations, stuff like that. And then last year we bought a house in Wilmore, where we kind of took the Inklings, Eagle and Child, and took it with a 2022 coffee shop. And the Inklings, of course, were C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and tried to make a place that centered on these two terms, imagination and fellowship,
That's awesome.
as being two terms, two concepts that we really need a lot in our world, right? So imagination being a term that deals with meaning,
Yeah.
and the substructures of reality. And so being a place where people can ask those questions and have good conversations like this,
Yeah.
and then fellowship being something more than community, right? So it's not about demographics, it's about hearts connecting, souls connecting. And so with that, we've kind of just created a space where we hope that we can be a catalyst for that, and doing programs and stuff like that this coming year, that are going to be, how to develop a meaningful narrative of your life, how to be a good father, asking, maybe putting on some shops about mental health and physical health, and just things around those things, those two concepts. So that's my full-time gig right now.
That's
I
awesome.
I teach through Asbury University a little bit. So between teaching and doing coffee, and business, that's kind of my day-to-day right now.
That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. And you told me also that you are planning on starting a podcast or are in the midst of developing a podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yep. So during the first year of Drinklings, before COVID hit, we had a little program that we called Thinklings, which basically we brought people together. It was coffee, culture, and conversation. And we had, people like Matt Sleeth come down. We had a talk on homelessness. Matt Sleeth talked about creation care. We had one on homelessness. We had one on the refugee situation, in which Medine Keener and Jacob Guat came and shared their stories about that and answered questions. And this was cool. We can't fit that into our new space now. And so we've been wrestling, how do we continue to have these kind of conversations? And then we realized, man, like a podcast would be a great place for these kind of things. So again, coffee, culture, and conversation is going to kind of be the subtext of that. So sometimes it will be about coffee. Other times it will be about cultural ideas, art, beauty, literature, meaning, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Maybe some social justice stuff, but doing some interviews and stuff around that. So we're in the midst of that. First episode is recorded. Second one is planned for this Friday. And then, we're going to try and get some on the ice before we launch. But, between that and, some writing and some books and stuff like that we really want to put out, we really want to unpack those two concepts of imagination and fellowship as being two old world terms that are really needed today in our modern world, in which we don't think about imagination. We think about inspiration, which is, can be organized. We don't think about fellowship. We think about community, which is demographic. But we think, as we look out on the world, we need more conversations about meaning, and we need more intimacy between, groups of people rather than demographics.
For sure. I wholeheartedly agree with you on imagination, on inspiring a sense of awe and wonder. I think that's so important today when people are becoming maybe more and more disillusioned with the world. Yeah, trying to bring out that sense of awe and wonder, trying to bring out that imagination and that understanding of beauty of the world around us, of people, I think is really important. And then you talked about fellowship and communion. As an introvert, Randy, those are tough concepts for me. Like, whenever I hear about the importance of fellowship, and you talked about having this group with other men that you get together with, and you guys share about your lives, and you grow together, and you mourn together, and you celebrate together. I always think, like, yes, that's so important. Fellowship and communion is so important. And then as an introvert, I struggle with that so much because I'm the type of person who naturally would so much rather just like trap myself in my room and not interact with other people. And so it's so important for me to be intentional about, okay, Ryan, like, you need fellowship in your life. You need communion in your life. And that might be uncomfortable at times, but you need to force yourself to have that because it is so meaningful. It is so important. It's so important for faith. It's so important for mental health and all that. So yeah, those two things, extremely important. And then I was going to ask you, Randy. Oh, I was going to make one more statement real quick because you said something that jumped out to me. In terms of my experience at ATS, you talked about social justice. That was something that I really appreciated about my experience there, is they really emphasize this idea of volunteering and getting involved in service projects, having a faithful presence in your community. That was something that, coming back from my background, I didn't really have that. And so that's something that I've really taken from ATS is, now living in Colorado Springs, just the importance of being involved in our communities and making a difference. And there's so many different charities that each of our towns have that we can team up with and be a part of. And that's so important. And that's something that, I really took from ATS. And I'm very thankful that I had professors that really emphasized that.
Absolutely.
So those were a couple things that kind of jumped out to me as you were talking. Now, this podcast, Randy, where can we find the content? And when will it be released?
Give us about 2 weeks to get it fully out there. But you can find it, you'll be able to find it on Apple, Google Podcast, anywhere that you find podcasts, or most of the places you find podcasts. You'll also be able to find a link at www.drinklings.coffee, as well as our social media, we actually have two handles. Drinklings Coffee House, which is the little day-to-day shop that we run, and then Drinklings Coffee and Mugs, which is kind of our meta organization. We'll post all that stuff there.
Awesome. That sounds great. Randy, it was such a pleasure listening to you. Your story is so powerful. It's so inspiring. And thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time. This episode, and all episodes of Thinker Sensitive, are available on thinkersensitive.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app today to listen to more thought-provoking content from Thinker Sensitive.